Health is an eternal topic for mankind. We are born on Earth, and our health is intimately linked to the environment and ecology. The environment is the basis for human survival and development, and every subtle change in the environment will eventually have an impact on biodiversity, ecosystem, and our health. Exploring how the environment and ecology affect our health in the past, present, and future is the mission of Eco-Environment&Health. Eco-Environment&Health is a journal initiated by prestigious scientists with a strong editorial board, including multidisciplinary scientists from all over the world. With the support from EEH, you will have a better publication experience. EEH has its own offices of publishing, language, design, and broadcasting. The experts will accompany you like an harmonious band and spare no effort to sublimate your valuable scientific research into a magnificent and impactful masterpiece. We have a dedicated center for decision-making that deeply integrates informatics, ecology, and environmental science. It explores global research hotspots, predicts discipline trends, monitors the influence and dissemination of publications, and supports the journal's smart decision-making. Upon receiving your submission, our assistant editors will contact you immediately and keep you informed of the manuscript status throughout the entire process. The 14-day rapid peer review will make the publication of your research one step ahead. Your distinguished work is worthy of being known worldwide. We will promote your research globally in a three-dimensional manner through various social media platforms. In addition, the open access fee will be waived for the first 3 years, making your research easier to be read and cited by your peers. We continue to explore and innovate the service strategy of the journal. EEH leads ecology and environment to a healthy future.
Can you all see the screen?
Right. Yes, I can.
All right. So thank you for the opportunity to present to you all. So today I would like to present a conceptual frameworks regarding what I'm doing these days, especially to deal with the uncertainty issues from the data problems when we are working on the environmental health studies. So let's talk about some brief background first. So when we are talking about urban environment and health risk, one of the recent ideas is to link all the urban environmental exposure together to study the total exposure regarding how it influences health or the social impacts across the society. So basically, in this figures, you can see that we are trying to integrate different kind of data from different dimensions, for example, from atmosphere, from built environment, even from social environment for studying the health risk. And at the same time, we will also try to integrate different kind of health data in different scale for modeling. This kind of frameworks is really useful, especially when we are talking about exposure this years. However, one question is that when we are dealing with all this data, the structure is actually very different. So sometimes there's some issues coming up regarding the bias of the modeling. So that's what we are trying to cover today, especially when we are talking about the urban environment. The urban environment is a compact environment. and the city setting is a high density living condition. So one of these issues is that the compact environment make the cities not just two-dimensional cities, such as those cities from maybe North America or Europe. You know, those cities are more flat. But when we are looking at all those cities from East Asia, for example, cities from Beijing, the district from Beijing, the district from Shanghai, you can see that there are lots of high density, high rise buildings, and all these buildings filled with a lot of people. So that's why we say that it's a high density living environment. And all these settings actually influencing the environmental data quality. It's also affecting the human behaviors and also the health condition. So this become the challenge of urban health studies, not just talking about how we can model those assumptions or relationship properly, but sometimes when we aggregate data, whether those data are representative is also the questions. So in this case, I'm trying to do some environmental health research in this years. And right now I'm working in the School of Clinical Medicine in HKU. So we are actually trying to develop some models to talk about how we can study the environmental health across the Asian high density cities with different universities in East Asia, for example, with those schools from Australia, from Beijing, from Anhui, etc. But the problem is that when we are dealing with this uncertainty issue, we are not sure how we should work on this. So one of the objectives when we are talking about all this built environments and health issue, well, our objective is to categorize the spatial uncertainties so that we can apply or at least to integrate those health and environmental data properly for the studies in the compact environment. So that's the objective. So let's talk about the things we are facing this year. The first question is a very generic questions, which we have been seeing in different studies. So it's about the spatial buffers. So when we are categorizing this built environment, can we simply use the spatial buffers to categorize the environment? That's the question. So traditionally, you can see this is examples we pull up in London. So basically, what they are trying to do is that in the urban health study, sometimes we are trying to buffer the residential locations to study the surrounding environment or so-called the neighborhood environment. For example, how many facilities surrounding your homes, or how many green space or public space next to your home, and etc. And basically what they are trying to do is that they're just simply drawing a circle with a radius to study the surrounding environment around a home. However, just think about that when we are talking about all this environmental health issue, whether this circle is representative is always a question, especially when we are talking about different dimensions of the environment. The applications or the buffers or the representativeness of the buffers will be changing too. So that's the question we are dealing with. So basically, one things we always have to deal with is the so-called the MAUP, the modifiable aerial unit problem. So what's happening is that it's actually a very old concept, but it's still a problem nowadays. So what's happening is that in modifiable aerial unit problems, this talk about it's linking to how problems would be occurs when we are trying to aggregate the data to a certain level. So there's two effects of this MAUP. One is the scaling issue, one is the zoning issue. So basically, what scaling issue is that when we are trying to scale the things from a micro scale to a macro scale, such as what you have seen from the blue rectangles. Basically, you can see that the numbers will change because how we aggregate or how we average data. So basically, once you average all this data in different ways, the result will be different. And zoning, what's happening for zoning is that sometimes when we are trying to aggregate the data, we are basically using different zone. For example, census tract, or maybe in China, we use street level, street block. Those are the boundaries from the government. However, since the size of the zone are very different, and it's actually affecting the average or the aggregate result. So it became a problem when we are trying to integrate all this data for mappings or for producing the environmental health data for study. So just a quick example when we are trying to deal with the health data. So for example, you can see that if we are using this is example, we are using two different zones to map the illness. Okay, so you can see that. So for example, in this example, two cases they don't have any health issue, so that's why 0. And one case they have the sickness. Okay, they are sick, so that's why it's an illness event. You can say that. You can see that it's the value is 1. So when we are trying to group in different regions, for example, region A and B, you can see that when we group in group based on the region A, region set A, basically you can see that since the lower regions they have 1 case without sickness and 1 case with sickness, so the illness rate will be 50. However, if we cut the data similar to the region B, since the margin or the boundary this time it's cutting through those cutting in between the data with and without signals. So it becomes like a very extreme result that in one side there's a 0 rate of illness, and another side they have the 100% illness rate. So it happens when we are trying to deal with all this environmental data and health data, because the way we cut the data may be problematic. Correct. So one issue is that, so when we are talking about this buffers, so in the model, so most of the times when we are using the radius one with circle is the easiest one to calculate. So that's why many papers, many publications, they use a circular buffer. However, in the reality, you can see that the road networks or the design or the urban design is quite different. All right. So if you are using if we are using the circular buffer, can we actually represent the cities or the working behaviors? And at the same time, if we change the buffer type or buffer shape, how the result can change? Those are the questions. So you can see that, okay, so in this example, when we replace the buffers with rectangular shape and the circular shape, and the last one is more likely based on their distance, based on the network. Okay, so you can see that where they cover and what they cover are totally different. So basically, if we are trying to count the closest distance, or maybe counting the facilities, number of facilities, or the green space percentage, those would be very different. So simply just look at these pictures, okay? So maybe when we are talking about, just to talk about the percentage of road network from the 3 buffers or these 3 models, okay? The percentage of road network will be different, totally different. So based on the numbers from this result, where we are trying to apply to the health model for estimation, the result will be dramatically different too. So that's why how we can pick up the correct models or correct buffering techniques is an issue, especially when we are talking about different dimensions of how the risk does very different too. So just think about that. So for this example, it's more linking to the walking behavior, the street level things. So it's more significant when we're talking about those elderly health or walking behavior and health, etc. But how about temperature and air pollution? Are they really relevant to this kind of problems? How they can be relevant? Those are the questions. All right. So for example, in the city, we said that air pollution can be from traffic. So, okay. So from traffic, from cars. So this kind of road network issues or buffering issue could be problems. However, another way to say that circular buffers may be more suitable for the regional air pollution is because of the air pollution is not from a single source. It's more likely from the whole environment. So basically, we can assume that without any blockage from the buildings or without any blockage from the urban morphology, the regional air pollution should be more stable or more not that cluster. Okay, so in this case, the circular buffer may be more representative to the home. Is because of we can assume that the air pollution can be coming from all directions, all locations, and the distance is a matter, but not. It's because of the air pollution should be coming from all direction, and it's degraded by the distance. So this kind of issue is actually linking to the data aggregation. And sometimes when we are doing with different kind of environmental exposure, how we can apply the best buffers for estimation is the question. Okay. So, and then at the same time, just even talking about the walking behaviors, when we are using this in different kind of cities, the result could be biased too. So this is an example. When we are going through the literatures, one of the questions is actually whether this kind of applications would be affected by the city settings. So it's obviously it's affected by the city setting. So you can see by these figures, for the city with more the street network, and when we are using the so-called surface area buffer, which means the street, which means the network buffer, the result will be more sensitive. However, when we are talking about those rural area, and the result will be not that sensitive. It's because of the network itself, the street network itself, it's limited. So in this case, it's actually affect the shape of the buffers or the result of the buffers. So what we will cover what we can cover from the buffering models and what the data can be extracted from the models are very complex, at least not irregular shape. And on top of that, it's not just about the buffering technique itself. It's also about the data quality from the other source. For example, one of the things we always do these days that we use their modeling result, or we use their satellite image for model for environmental health estimation. In this case, sometimes the resolution of all this data are the question. So just looking at this pictures, it's talking about the land cover or the green space in each location. So basically, in this year, because public health scientists, they're not the GIS expert, so people they really like to use NDVI or simply some satellite image applications for so-called mapping the vegetation. However, the sources are very different. For example, they could get the data from raw data, they could get the data from Landsat, they could even get the data from MODIS, but the resolution are quite different. For example, you know that like iColors or raw or spot, the resolution is less than 10 meters, Landsat 30 meters, and MODIS it goes to kilometers. So when we are talking about this, when we are trying to aggregate data in one region, will the results still be the same? And also for those air quality mappings, the resolution can be from 10 meters, 20 meters, 30 meters because of their aggregation. So after using the aggregated data, when we further aggregate to our buffers, whether the data will be still the same, that's the question. Right. So looking at this figures, you can see that I try to draw a rectangle, so showing what you can see here is that, okay, so assuming the rectangle is the buffer you're using, okay, when we are trying to apply the same buffers, system system buffers to different kind of resolutions data, all right, so you can see that when we apply the buffers to the maps from 10 meters to 210 meters. You can see that within the rectangles, the resolution is totally different. So the size of each data, the values of each data are totally different. So when we try to aggregate the data, for example, taking the average, taking the standard deviations, or even maximum, minimum, all those numbers, the result within this rectangle will be different. So when we plug in this result to further estimation based on statistical analysis, the result would be yield 2. So that's the question we have to think about when we are trying to work on the environmental health studies. And more important is that sometimes when we are trying to integrate the data, we are not trying to just integrate the data by getting the result. We are trying to integrate the data from multi-dimension to make a new map, so new result. Okay. So this is the examples I have been doing before. So in these studies, we try to integrate both census data and the temperature data together to map the so-called heat risk across the city. Okay, so in this case, one of the things is that when we are trying to aggregate data, since census data are more likely based on zone, for example, street networks or street block, but the temperature could be what's the data. Okay, they are this pixels. They are determined by the resolution. Okay, so in this case, when we try to map the result based on the average of this temperature data and the census data, we are thinking whether we should use the vector-based result or the raster-based result for mapping. It's because of when we are trying to map these things, if we are using a raster-based data method, that means we have to convert all the census data to raster level. At the same time, if we are trying to do the mapping based on polygon, based on census block, all those vector-based data, that means we have to first of all average or aggregate the temperature to each street block before we can map the data. So we try the result, try the mappings using different methods to see whether the result will be very different. So in this case, you can see that the result is actually dramatically different. So the left side is the overall maps from the city, and the right side you can see that we zoom close to the city. Okay, so this is actually an suburban area of that city. So you can see that in this study, the highest risk will be the red colored pixels or the polygons, and for the blue color one, more blue area, they are the low risk area. So you can see that based on using two different platforms, the results are totally different. So you can see that in for the raster-based result from this study, basically most of the area they will predict to be a high risk area because of how the data has been extracted. At the same time, you can see a higher variabilities, which means higher variations between the data. At the same time, compared to this, we can see that the weather data it shows more blue area. The overall risk is much lower than the result from the raster-based data. At the same time, you can see that itself high variabilities. It shows a high cluster of the heat risk. So it becomes a question when we are trying to model the result, when we are trying to provide the result to the public. How can we do? What can we do? That's the question. So that's actually linked to the things we call is the public health surveillance. So what it means is that for public health, and more likely instead of just talking about providing some evidence regarding the health and environmental relationship. We also try to talk about the action. Okay, so for the health officials, for those emergency workers, what they want to get from the result is not just the assumption or the relationship between and exposure and the disease. More likely, they want to know how they can minimize the disaster, they can reduce the environmental burden, they can minimize the health burdens from their application. So in this case, what they want is to think about how they can reallocate all the resources for management, for risk reduction, especially when they are talking about environmental health studies or the spatial epidemiology. What they really want is that they can identify the risk area. They can, and then in this case, they know how to send out a teams of workers to deal with the problems during the extreme days, and this day, or maybe how to build up the warning system so that they can minimize the problems of the city in an effective way. So it's more likely it's a cost-effective idea. It's not just talking about how to minimize the problem, but how we can save the money, save the economic burdens. At the same time, we can minimize the health issue. So in this case, when we are trying to deliver the result to this public health official, which data shall we provide to them? Which kind of results should we deliver to them? Is the question. At the same time, how many uncertainties will this result provided to them involve? That's another issue. Just think about that. If we provide a very low quality result, maybe the whole plannings, whole emergency risk management would be problematic. It means no use at all. So in this case, it cannot minimize the health issue, but it actually create more health issue. However, if it's trying to deliver a very complicated result, and the result with a lot of it's based on a very costly model, and it's hard to interpret. So for the official, they have difficulties to use the data. So that's another issue too. So how can we take a balance between the bias, between the uncertainties and the accuracy? That's the question we are always dealing with at this moment. And more important is that it's not when we are talking about the urban environment, it's not just a two-dimensional issue. It's actually a three-dimensional issue. Okay, so when I showed the example to you before, those are the things we're working for. Those Western city, they are more flat. Okay, they don't have the two-dimensional environment. Okay, but when we are talking about the East Asia city, for example, Beijing, Shanghai, or Hong Kong, or maybe Tokyo, right? Those cities, they actually have a lot of high-rise, high buildings, and then it's high density. So when we compress all this three-dimensional data to the 2D information, that's another issue too. So just think about that when we are trying to do the models, the statistical models, actually they are not really 3D. They are the two-dimensional result. So basically, what we are trying to provide to them is the aggregation of the three-dimensional data to two-dimensional data. So the way we aggregate the data, compress the data, is actually the issue. So just think about in this case, just think about that when we are using different view angles. Okay, for example, we are talking about a three-dimensional environment. So using different view angles would from maybe from a windows, from a location, would affect the result. So just think about that. Okay, so this is a view we can see. Okay, so when we are talking about the views from the high area to the low area, since different view angles, they could affect their observation. So it becomes a three-dimensional uncertainties, and it can be a horizontal issue, it can be vertical issue. And one of the things is that, okay, so go back here, just think about that. When we are talking about all this view angle, we are assuming that all the things is going horizontally. Now, what it means is that, okay, so when we are ruling, just to think about the visibility analysis from the ArcGIS, okay, so when we are trying to build the green space from a window, more likely we assume that the people will view the things horizontally, like how I look at the zoom camera. However, in reality, it is true. So when we are trying to look outside, are we actually looking strictly or looking downwardly? Those are the questions. And then it's actually affected view angles. At the same time, what the scale of view angle means is that how we aggregate is talking about how we aggregate the angular data. For example, we trying to divide the density space on 1 degree, 2 degrees, 3 degrees, or every 10 degrees, 20 degrees. All this result would be and then it's affect the data we aggregate in 3 dimensions. And also in 360 degrees. Okay, so in this case, the data what we got may be problematic. So it's actually very it's a big question. It's because of sometimes when we are talking about some health issue, and some people when we are talking about the urban health or environmental health, they feel like the bird data from the satellite image is not useful because it's not really representative to the perceived environment or what they actually see. So they really want to model the views from the windows to represent the actual green space you can see from each window. However, all the actual angles they build or their actual the scale they use for the aggregations, it's actually a limitation. So it becomes a lot of hypothesis or assumption. The result it's may not be that accurate. Okay, so at the same time, it's not just about the view angle. Okay, so when we're talking about the view angle, is to visualize what you have seen. But more likely, sometimes when we're doing all these things, it's more linked to those invisible data, for example, noise or air pollution, because they are more likely talking about things called indoor-outdoor exchange. Okay, so when the air, for example, when the noise from the traffic, okay, they can also get inside the indoor environment, which influencing the indoor exposure. And then these kind of things can actually influencing the health much more than you expect. Okay, so but when we integrate all these things, okay, so how we assume the noise noise distribution, and how we assume the chance of noise from the road network to the house is always a question. So just to think about that, whether the noise is going straight or going in different directions, how they diffuse, those are the questions, and that's all linked to the view angles we just talked about. Okay. And on top of that, when we are talking about the environment, okay, so just go back to the physical or more walkable environment. So when we are talking about those environmental health studies, okay, which link to urban health or walkability, they always want to talk about the walking behaviors. But what they assume is that they always assume that the house is the same, is a small house. Okay, so it's because of it's a traditional Western setting. The house is a small house. Okay, so they can just centralize the house in based on one location. However, in the high density cities, totally different. Okay, so basically we have multiple exits from the buildings or from a building complex. Okay, so when we are modeling or the so-called the distance to facilities or to the green space, etc., how we can centralize the spatial objects is the question. So this is an example. We are working for a housing estate project, and these few years, this kind of housing estate is actually not that new. It's already the old estate, but you can see that in each buildings they have multiple exits. So for modeling the result, when we are trying to link this to the facilities, can we actually know which exit they go? We don't know. And will the exit yield the result? It definitely is. So just look at the maps here. Okay, so assuming that we are trying to model all this this kind of linear distance things based on different exits. Okay, so we're trying to map to a single location, and then you can see that, for example, there's a clinic. It's called the Hong Kong Red Society Free Clinics. Okay, near their home. So we want to know how far, how close this clinic to their home is. If we use the exit, okay, if we use different exit, the total length, total distance is actually total difference. It's actually totally different. Okay, so in this case, yeah, even using the so-called better models, for example, the one mentioned, the street level one, okay, using the street level, the models, street level buffers to model the result. The data we got from this aggregations or the buffering would be different. Okay, so in this case, the estimation or the assumption would be affected because of the data quality itself. But we never know how these people actually walks around unless you ask them about the preference. Okay, so this becomes the issue when we are trying to aggregate the models data to the statistical analysis. Okay, and then based on this, we also trying to talk about all these three-dimensional and two-dimensional things, and to link to link to those actual applications. And one of the things is that when we're talking about the three-dimensional things, it's not just about the wheel angles. It's actually talking about the walkable slope and etc. So one thing is that so go back here when we're talking about all these things, you can see that it looks like all the thing is flat. Okay, it's 2D. However, in realities, the city could be is a three-dimensional city. It's not just about the buildings, but it's also about the terrain. So when we are calculating all these buffers or all this street network estimation, okay, shall we include the terrain or slope in the models, and how? Those are the questions we have to think about. So we have done some basic analysis to do this kind of handiworks to compare the green environment surrounding a location, which is from one of the studies for those housing estate. You can see that the result is totally different. Even we simply just aggregate the result based on 4 tile buffers, which is two-dimensional circular buffers and two-dimensional street network based buffer, and also the one include terrain and slope, which means three-dimensional. You can see that the result are dramatically different. The mean could be different, not just mean, the standard deviation, max, and the minimum result could be different. So when we applied all this data for modeling, so you can see that the health estimation could be different too. So in this study, we measure the different kind of dimension of the built environment based on this whole model. We study the public space, we study the green environment and different kind of facilities in terms of distance, in terms of their numerous facilities surrounding their home. And we're trying to study the impact on dementia, on osteoporosis. We found that the result actually quite different. So just look at this example. Now, when we are trying to estimate the result from, the effect of public space on the osteoporosis, which is the bone issue, okay? So as you can see that using the buffer, using the traditional circular buffer, although we can find the effect, the benefit from the public space, but actually it's underestimated. In comparison, when we're trying to study using the level analysis, okay, to model the surrounding, the effect is much larger than the circular buffer. And even in between the same kind of buffers, which mean circular versus circular or network versus network, if we include the terrain and slope, the result also yield too. Although it's not very significant, but still yield. However, at the same time, in this when I pull up this figure for you, you may assume that three-dimensional network will be the best result, or maybe it is the best model. However, when we are trying to look at the AIC, which is kind of model, the performance estimation, we'll actually find that for the model performance itself, dramatically and ironically, two-dimensional circular buffers they has the best model performance, but the three-dimensional networks has the worst model performance. So it becomes the issue when we are trying to perform the data, when we are trying to provide the data to those health officials. Shall we just determine the result based on model performance, or shall we try to deliver the data based on the hypothesis or the assumption regarding which kind of data more linked to the actual environment? Those are the things we are thinking about. So one thing linking to that is that when we're trying to deal with all these things, it's talking about circular and spatial things, okay. But in reality, is that there's a lot of people, they try to solve this kind of issue in different ways, okay. So for example, one of the things is that they try to use location-based service to aggregate data. So in this case, does this kind of method actually help to solve the problem? It's the question. So why pull up this is because of sometimes when we are talking about the urban health study, so people will assume that, okay, so when we are mapping the bufferings surrounding the home, okay, they are not really representing the actual space usage. So they're trying to use different kind of data nowadays, for example, the GPS tracking data, social media data, to talk about the so-called the trajectory or the population movement. Okay, so this help us to integrate or to aggregate the data. However, so just talk about that. Okay, when we integrate and aggregate the data, just not talking about the spatial dimension. Sometimes when we aggregate this data, the temporal issue is actually a problem. For the scaling issue, it's not just talking about the spatial scaling issue. Nowadays, we also talk about the temporal scaling issue. It's because of when we aggregate data, we also think about how we summarize our data weekly or daily or yearly, etc. However, you can see that when we are looking at the realities, just talking about the data getting from this kind of mobile phone, I mean the data aggregation getting from this mobile phone information, you can see that even within the weekday, the result could be a little bit different. Okay, so further looking at different days, you can see that the data could be totally different, and this is different in and this kind of difference could be various from different locations too. For example, maybe in the commercial area, they will have a significant weekday weekend effect. However, in public space or near the residential home, the effect will be minimized because of the patterns should be similar from Monday to Sunday. So in this case, when we aggregate this temporal data to the model, what should we do? Shall we just talk about Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, or shall we use a 24/7 hours perspective? And even go to 24/7 hours perspective, you can see there's a lot of change in between the location. So is that a proper method to aggregate the data? Those are the questions we have to think about. And further from this, another objective, from the other people is that we always think about the real data from their satellite is not appropriate anymore. So sometimes we think that when we are using the street view network, street view data from the street network, it's more appropriate for mapping the actual environment or perceived environment. And so it's very common nowadays to use that to replace them. Replace the satellite image for mapping, so for health estimation. However, two problems from here. So first of all, direction. So when we're talking about the street network, we just simply say that, okay, it's a street network, okay. However, in reality, okay, so when we are walking in the street, the street network is not one direction. It could be 360 direction. So what it means that, okay, you can face north, you can face to the south, you can face to the west, you can face to the east. And at the same time, again, whether you are looking down, looking up, looking straight, that will be totally different. So in this case, even just talking about the east, south, west, north dimension, you can see that from the same location, the result could be totally different. This example, we're trying to estimate the green space coverage from the street cap. You can see that when we are trying to using the same location, but when we are trying to look calculate the results based on the east, south, west, north, the green coverage or the percentage is actually totally different. So in this case, which should we use, or shall we just simply use the average, or shall we make some things like the standard deviations or more very strict applications for this kind of application is the question. So one thing we can stop is that, okay, so go back to the traditional methods when we're talking about the image fusion or image estimation. One of the methods we can do is the fuzzy logic, because fuzzy logic can assume the more possibility to reduce or to optimize the data or to reduce the uncertainty. However, how we can do the fuzzy logic and in what kind of uncertainty can we accept in this kind of models, or maybe the probabilities, what kind of probabilities we assume for this kind of estimation itself is actually yield the result too. So basically, when we provide the so-called the street level data to the other people, are we simply just taking the data from one direction, or is this simply just an average, or is this a better aggregation? Those are the things we have to think about. Okay. And another thing is that, okay, it's a temporal dimension. Okay, so when those street network data, when they take, it actually depends on the companies. Okay, for example, Google Maps, Baidu, or those road map applications companies. Okay, but when they are taking it at night or day, the result will be totally different. And some even within a day, the data will be different too. So sometimes this data may be problematic. For example, just talk about greens. Okay, green is the most stable one. Okay, supposed to be, it won't be changing within a day. However, it could be changing through the season. For example, if data is taken in the winter, the result will be totally different than taking from the summer. Okay. However, it's not like a satellite image can get the data within the orbit, within a cycle. We never know when the street level data can be updated. So in this case, for example, when we're talking about the green space average, is this the actual average we are getting from the environment, or is this just an extreme case because of the winter situation, because of the summer situation? Those are the questions too. At the same time, just think about that. If there's any sudden event, for example, construction site or road networks fixing within the environment, this kind of greenery percentage will be changed. For example, maybe the buildings in the top corner, if it's in renovation, the tree may be chopped or it may be removed. So in this case, the result will be different. So this becomes a lot of temporal and spatial uncertainties behind the applications. Okay. So today, for me, what I'm trying to share is that there's a lot of scaling issue in the environmental studies, and the scaling issue is not just talking about a spatial issue, but it could be from the temporal issue and also from the angular dimensions. So, and at the same time, this kind of things is multidimensional. So when we are talking about the environmental health studies, right now the paper is blooming, it's easy to publish, it's easier to find the so-called relationship between one exposure and the relationship with the other health risks, something like that. Okay. However, whether this result meaningful, whether this result are accurate, is something we have to think about. All right. So lastly, just to promote one of the recent publications that we talk about this issue and this day. And if you have more questions, please let me know. All right. Thank you.